From being brutally impaled in gladiatorial combat to suffering from a heart attack in your mom's basement. These are the ways you would most likely die in every century. Please keep in mind that some of these causes of death might not have been the top killer in their day, but they weren't anything to sneeze at either. Starting with the 1st century, which was basically during the reign of the Roman Empire, and the way you could likely die during this period would be by crucifixion, which was a pretty common and brutal form of execution back in the day, and you guys already know how crucifixion is pretty much done. You nail a person to a cross and raise the cross upright, and for good measure, the individual is also naked. So now if the excessive blood loss doesn't kill you, the shame definitely will. Or it could have just been done in by an infectious disease like dysentery. Moving on to the 2nd century, where you would likely die in gladiatorial combat. Pretty sweet, huh? Well, no, not sweet at all. You see, gladiatorial combat was kinda a brutal way to go out because gladiators would regularly engage in mortal combat with the likes of other gladiators, wild animals, or even condemned prisoners. No one said you had to be the gladiator. And these combats could sometimes, well, not go your way, which would sometimes lead to a painful and excruciating death. Next we have the 3rd century. Malaria would likely do you in, pretty standard stuff. Next we have the 4th century, where you could likely die from tuberculosis or some other infectious disease. Wait, it gets better. Cause in the 5th century, the fall of Rome began, and in this period, one could likely die from battle axe wounds, probably gotten while fighting for the glory of Rome. A honorable way to go out if you ask me. Moving on to the 6th century, where we had the first ever pandemic in the world, the plague of Justinian. This plague single-handedly killed between 15 to 100 million people, which was approximately a quarter to a half of Europe at the time. The cause of the plague was Yersinia pestis, the same bacteria responsible for the Black Death. This parasite is a parasite to its host, the rat flea, which is also a parasite of rats, hence why you shouldn't have fed that rat when you got to the 6th century. In the 7th century, the Islamic conquest happened, and sword fighting was the prevalent form of combat during the conquest. And poor you don't know how to use a sword, so you get lacerated, stabbed, or amputated, and that, my friend, is how you likely die in the 7th century. But it gets better in the 8th century, where you could likely die from measly starvation due to all the Viking raids going on, which continued on even to the next century, which is also when the sons of Ragnar launched a large-scale invasion on England. You would think that because of the invasion you would likely die in some cool way like impalement, beheading, or being blood-eagled. But no, you could likely die from drowning due to all the naval battles that was going on at the time. Or you could die through those other ways as well, due to all the violence. But in the 10th century, you likely die from arrow wounds. In the 11th century, Christians were at conflict with Muslims, and they would often use crusades to aid their agenda. The crusades were a series of religious wars initiated, supported, and sometimes even directed by the Christian Latin Church. And seeing as they were wars, one could die in a variety of ways, like being impaled with a spear, slashed with a sword, or an arrow to the head, or even all of the above. And that's where you come in. Moving on to the 12th century, where you would likely die of leprosy, which was a common cause of death at the time, particularly due to the lack of proper medical understanding and care. And though leprosy itself isn't typically fatal, it could still lead to more severe consequences like disfigurement and disability, increased susceptibility to other diseases, and social isolation and stigma, which in its way could push someone to ending it all. Next is 13th century, where you could likely die from some infectious disease, but that changed in the 14th century, where a specific disease would most likely do you in. I'm of course talking about the Black Death, which caused one of the most fatal pandemics in human history. This plague single-handedly wiped out almost half of Europe, which was as many as 50 million people at the time, and you just happen to be part of them. In the 15th and 16th century, smallpox decided to make a name for itself across most of Europe, where it had a mortality rate of 30%. And by the 16th century, it went beyond Europe and became a predominant cause of morbidity and mortality throughout much of the world. From the 17th to 19th century, tuberculosis was on the rise and became a leading cause of death in these centuries, with people, including you, coughing themselves to death. Make no mistake, it was a painful way to go out. Now, in the 20th and 21st century, you could probably die of a heart disease due to your sedentary lifestyle and poor diet. Or you could just die of cancer.